It was a quiet, ordinary day in a small, unsuspecting town, the kind of place where neighbors knew each other's names, and everyone thought they could trust their own family. But beneath this calm, a horrifying secret was brewing. Shane Moore, a woman known for her warmth and close relationships with her family, had no idea that her life was about to be cut tragically short, by someone she should have been able to trust above all else, her own niece, Tucker Reed. The murder itself was sudden and brutal. Shane Moore didn't see it coming. What makes this case even more chilling is the sheer premeditation involved. Tucker, a teenager at the time, had been plotting this act in ways that shocked both law enforcement and the community. For many, the idea that a young family member could commit such an act was almost impossible to comprehend. Friends and neighbors described Tucker as a troubled teen, yes, but no one imagined she could escalate to murder. When authorities arrived at the scene, the reality of Shane Moore's death was immediately apparent. The crime scene revealed a shocking level of violence, evidence that the attack had been personal, intentional, and terrifyingly deliberate. Family members were left in disbelief, grappling with the idea that someone so young and so close could inflict such harm. The emotional aftermath was devastating. Relatives were plunged into grief, confusion, and anger, struggling to reconcile the loving niece they thought they knew with the cold-blooded act she had committed. In communities like this, family is everything, which made the betrayal feel even more profound. Parents, siblings, and extended relatives were forced to confront a reality that no one ever expects, that sometimes, danger can come from the people we hold closest to our hearts. This murder didn't just shatter one family, it sent ripples throughout the town. People began questioning what signs they had missed, what behavioral patterns had been ignored, and how someone so young could commit such a violent act. It became a story that was not just about death, but about the fragility of trust, the darkness that can lurk behind familiar faces, and the horrifying reality that even the safest places aren't always safe. Shane Moore's death marked the beginning of a shocking tale that would intertwine murder, family betrayal, and a disturbing future in the spotlight, a story that would leave everyone questioning how it all could have gone so wrong. Before the shocking murder of Shane Moore, Tucker Reed's life was already marked by a trail of troubling behaviors and warning signs that hinted at the darkness lying beneath her teenage facade. From a young age, Tucker displayed patterns of aggression, manipulation, and defiance that often left adults around her bewildered and concerned. While many dismissed her actions as typical teenage rebellion, those closest to her began noticing that her behavior was far more calculated and disturbing than the usual teenage antics. Family members recall instances in her childhood when Tucker would create chaos intentionally, seemingly to see how people would react. She could charm her way out of punishments, twist stories to her advantage, and turn conflicts into opportunities to assert control. These were not isolated incidents, they were recurring patterns that reflected a deep desire to dominate situations and influence others. Teachers at school often reported her as highly intelligent but manipulative, someone who knew exactly how to push boundaries without immediately getting caught. She seemed to enjoy testing limits and watching as authority figures struggled to manage her behavior. One of the most unsettling aspects of Tucker's past was her fascination with control over others. She often targeted those she perceived as weaker or vulnerable, subtly sowing discord among peers or family members. Friends of the family would sometimes notice her using intimidation or emotional manipulation to get her way. Neighbors described moments when she would say or do things that left them feeling uneasy, sensing that her actions carried a hidden, unsettling intensity that didn't match her age. Her personal relationships were also marked by turbulence and unpredictability. Tucker could be warm, affectionate, and charming at one moment, only to become hostile, confrontational, or cold in the next. People around her struggled to understand this duality. While she seemed outwardly confident and intelligent, she also carried an undercurrent of anger and resentment that occasionally erupted in verbal or emotional outbursts. These inconsistencies made it difficult for anyone to predict how she might react in high-stress situations, a factor that would later play a chilling role in the murder of Shane Moore. Beyond her interpersonal behavior, Tucker exhibited a fascination with darker subjects. She was drawn to stories of crime, violence, and horror from a young age, often consuming media that explored human depravity and psychological manipulation. Experts who later examined her life noted that this interest in violence, when combined with her history of manipulation and control, could be seen as a precursor to the shocking events that would unfold. Her curiosity was not innocent, it reflected a deeper obsession with power, fear, and the consequences of taking action into her own hands. Even her school years were punctuated by incidents that raised serious concerns. Teachers reported instances of bullying, deceit, and subtle aggression toward classmates. While some of these moments might have seemed minor, they were consistent and escalating, forming a troubling pattern. Tucker would manipulate situations to ensure she emerged unscathed, leaving others confused, frightened, or humiliated. Psychologists reviewing her history later suggested that these behaviors were indicative of a young person with a potential for violence, someone who struggled to empathize with others and saw people as objects to control rather than human beings with feelings. Perhaps most alarming was the way Tucker's behavior within her own family hinted at a brewing danger. While she maintained a surface-level connection with relatives, there were moments of tension, intimidation, and subtle threats. Family members would sometimes joke nervously about her unpredictability, never realizing how serious it truly was. The combination of her intelligence, manipulative tendencies, fascination with violence, and volatile personality created a perfect storm that foreshadowed the tragic murder of her aunt, Shane Moore. Ultimately, Tucker Reed's troubled past was not merely a collection of bad decisions or teenage misbehavior. It was a complex tapestry of warning signs, behavioral patterns, and personality traits that, in hindsight, made the murder less inexplicable, though no less horrifying. Understanding her history provides crucial context for the shocking act she would commit, a reminder of how early behaviors, if unchecked or misunderstood, can escalate into devastating consequences. Her past paints a chilling picture of a young person teetering on the edge of morality, driven by impulses, curiosity, and a desire for control, setting the stage for a crime that would shock the world. The day Shane Moore was murdered, the quiet town that had once felt safe was suddenly thrown into chaos. Police and investigators arrived at the scene to find a picture of horror that no one could have imagined. Shane's life had been violently taken, and the circumstances surrounding her death were as shocking as they were tragic. What initially appeared to some as a senseless act of violence would soon unravel into a chilling story of premeditation, betrayal, and a shocking family secret. From the very beginning, investigators knew this case would not be straightforward. The crime scene offered disturbing clues, but it also left many questions unanswered. How could someone so young, someone within her own family, commit such a brutal act? And why? These were the questions that haunted detectives as they began meticulously piecing together the events leading up to Shane Moore's death. Law enforcement approached the investigation with extreme care. Every detail mattered: the position of the body, the items in the home, fingerprints, and even digital evidence. Officers spoke with neighbors and friends, trying to reconstruct Shane's last moments and understand if anyone had seen unusual activity. It became clear very quickly that the perpetrator was not a stranger. The level of violence and the personal nature of the attack pointed toward someone who knew Shane intimately, someone who understood her routines and her vulnerabilities. As the investigation deepened, attention quickly focused on Tucker Reed. Law enforcement discovered evidence suggesting that the murder had been carefully planned. Conversations with friends and family revealed subtle warning signs that had been dismissed in the past: small threats, unusual behavior, and a fascination with violent scenarios. Investigators began to build a profile of Tucker, analyzing her background, her history of manipulation, and her interactions with Shane. The pieces of the puzzle started fitting together, painting a disturbing picture of a young woman capable of orchestrating a horrific crime. Digital evidence also played a key role. Text messages, emails, and social media interactions were scrutinized for clues. Investigators discovered that Tucker had been in communication with certain individuals in ways that suggested forethought. Every message, every post, every small detail became crucial in understanding not just what had happened, but why it had happened. It was a painstaking process, but one that ultimately revealed a level of premeditation that shocked even seasoned detectives. Interviews with friends, neighbors, and relatives added further depth to the investigation. Some recalled incidents where Tucker displayed aggression, manipulation, or a desire to control situations. Others were haunted by moments they had once considered trivial but now seemed ominous in hindsight. Each testimony added layers to the investigation, highlighting the complexity of Tucker's personality and the disturbing signs that had preceded the murder. The investigation also had a broader impact beyond just the family. The community watched closely as authorities worked tirelessly to uncover the truth. Fear, disbelief, and speculation ran rampant, with many struggling to reconcile the idea that such a young person, a member of their own community, could commit such a violent act. The case became not just a murder investigation, but a study in human psychology, family dynamics, and the consequences of unchecked behavioral issues. As the evidence mounted, prosecutors built a compelling case against Tucker Reed. Law enforcement's thorough work ensured that every angle was explored, from forensic analysis to interviews, from digital footprints to psychological evaluations. The investigation left no stone unturned, piecing together a story that was as chilling as it was heartbreaking. In the end, the murder investigation revealed the horrifying truth: this was not a random act of violence, but a deliberate, calculated betrayal of family trust, executed by someone who had been living among them all along. As news of Shane Moore's murder by her niece, Tucker Reed, began to spread, the reaction from the public and the media was immediate and intense. What started as a small, local tragedy quickly snowballed into a story that captured national attention, shocking people far beyond the borders of their quiet town. The idea that someone so young, someone within her own family, could commit such a violent and premeditated act was almost impossible for the public to comprehend. Headlines splashed across newspapers, online platforms, and television broadcasts, all highlighting the shocking nature of the crime and the eerie circumstances surrounding it. Media coverage was relentless. Reporters focused on every angle of the story, dissecting the personalities, the family history, and the chilling details of the murder. Documentaries and true crime programs seized upon the narrative, emphasizing the betrayal inherent in a family member turning against their own. Tucker Reed, once just a troubled teenager, became a figure of public fascination and fear. Every action, every previous behavioral issue, every detail from her past was scrutinized and analyzed, often sensationalized to captivate audiences hungry for answers to such a disturbing crime. The public reaction was a mixture of horror, disbelief, and fascination. Many struggled to reconcile the image of a teenager, a young woman, barely out of adolescence, with the cold, calculated nature of the murder. Discussions erupted online, on forums, social media platforms, and community boards. People debated not just the crime itself, but the factors that might have led to it: her upbringing, her past behavior, the influence of media, and the psychological state that could drive someone to such an extreme act. It wasn't just a crime story, it became a cultural conversation about morality, trust, and the dangers that can lurk in even the most familiar places. Some in the public were horrified by Tucker's subsequent actions after the murder, particularly her pursuit of an acting career and appearances in horror films. The irony of a young murderer starring in violent entertainment did not escape anyone, and it fueled sensational headlines and heated debates. Critics argued that this blurred the line between reality and performance, questioning how someone who committed such a crime could seemingly continue with life in the public eye. Others wondered if the media attention itself, combined with her personality and behavior, had influenced her path or exacerbated her fascination with attention and control. Families across the country watched in fear and concern, questioning their own dynamics and the warning signs they might be missing in their children. Experts were called upon to provide insight into juvenile delinquency, the psychology of family violence, and the factors that lead young people to commit extreme acts. Psychologists, sociologists, and criminologists dissected the case in interviews, explaining the complex interplay of behavioral issues, family dynamics, and situational triggers that culminated in tragedy. The media also played a role in shaping public perception of justice. The coverage was unrelenting, with some arguing that it bordered on exploitation, while others insisted it was necessary to shed light on such a rare and disturbing crime. Social media, in particular, became a platform for debate, with threads and posts speculating on every possible motive and consequence. The case became a cautionary tale for parents, communities, and the public at large. Even the most seemingly innocent or ordinary young people could harbor hidden dangers, and no family is immune to the darkness that can hide behind a familiar face. Ultimately, the murder of Shane Moore and the rise of Tucker Reed into public notoriety exposed society to the uncomfortable reality of how family, youth, and violence can intersect in ways that shock and horrify. It forced the media, the public, and even experts to confront questions that have no easy answers. How do we prevent such tragedies? How do we recognize warning signs before it's too late? And how do we reconcile the innocence of youth with the capacity for calculated violence? In the wake of this crime, the story of Shane Moore and Tucker Reed would not just be remembered for its horror, but for the enduring questions it raised about family, trust, and the human psyche. In the aftermath of Shane Moore's tragic murder, Tucker Reed's life took a path that many found chillingly ironic. She began pursuing a career in acting, ultimately starring in horror films. To the outside world, it might have seemed like a strange choice for someone with such a dark past, but for Tucker, it appeared to be a continuation of her fascination with control, fear, and the macabre. The very same young woman who had committed a violent act within her own family was now stepping into roles that allowed her to dramatize, explore, and even profit from fictional violence. Her move into the world of horror films drew intense public scrutiny. Audiences and critics alike were unsettled by the idea that someone with her real-life criminal history was portraying acts of terror and fear on screen. While many actors take on fictional roles that explore darkness and horror, Tucker's past added a haunting layer of reality to her performances. The line between fiction and fact seemed disturbingly blurred, and people couldn't help but feel that her real-life actions gave her a unique, and unsettling, perspective in these roles. Tucker's performances were often noted for their intensity and convincing portrayal of fear and menace. Some argued that her ability to tap into these emotions stemmed not just from talent, but from lived experience, an intimate understanding of what it means to commit a violent act, to manipulate, and to experience the consequences of crossing moral boundaries. It was a level of authenticity that made her performances compelling, yet profoundly disturbing to those who were aware of her history. The media seized on this narrative. Headlines emphasized the irony of a murderer starring in horror films, sensationalizing the story for audiences hungry for shocking details. Interviews, reviews, and documentaries often framed her career choices as both bold and morally questionable. Critics debated the ethics of allowing someone with such a past to occupy roles centered around violence, raising larger questions about rehabilitation, opportunity, and the public's fascination with true crime. Tucker's horror film career also reflected her desire for attention and influence. Acting gave her a platform to control narratives, to project fear, and to remain in the public eye, echoing patterns from her past where she sought control over people and situations. For Tucker, the transition from real-life violence to performing scripted violence may have felt natural, a way to process or channel her experiences, even as it sparked outrage and fascination in the public. Fans of the genre and critics alike couldn't ignore the complexity of Tucker's situation. On one hand, she was a talented actress, capable of delivering intense and believable performances. On the other, her presence in horror films served as a chilling reminder of her past actions, forcing viewers to confront uncomfortable questions about morality, entertainment, and the thin line between life and art. Her career became a conversation starter, not just about acting, but about human nature, the consequences of crime, and society's complicated relationship with notoriety. Ultimately, Tucker Reed's entry into horror films did more than just advance her career, it cemented her infamy and added a haunting layer to an already shocking story. The juxtaposition of real-life murder with fictional terror created a narrative that fascinated, horrified, and unsettled the public. Her path into Hollywood, particularly into a genre so closely tied to fear and violence, was a stark illustration of the complex interplay between human behavior, public perception, and the allure of storytelling that blurs the lines between reality and fiction. Tucker's career in horror films became an extension of her story, a dark chapter that intertwined her criminal past with her pursuit of fame, leaving an indelible mark on both her own life and the cultural imagination. It was a reminder that sometimes, the most terrifying performances come from those who have glimpsed the darkest corners of human behavior in real life. After the murder of Shane Moore and the shocking revelation of Tucker Reed's involvement, the focus inevitably shifted to the legal system. How would the courts handle a case involving a young perpetrator whose actions were so calculated and horrifying? The trial became a defining moment, not just for Tucker, but for the community, the family, and the wider public, as everyone awaited justice for a crime that had left a deep scar. From the outset, the legal proceedings were complex. Tucker was a teenager at the time of the murder, which meant that her age would play a critical role in how the law approached her case. Prosecutors argued that despite her youth, the level of planning and premeditation demonstrated in the murder required serious legal consequences. Evidence presented in court detailed her actions leading up to the crime, her behavior afterward, and the chilling lack of remorse, painting a picture of someone who understood the gravity of what she was doing. The trial was a tense and emotional process. Family members, friends, and neighbors were called to testify, recounting the warning signs they had observed and the profound impact the murder had on their lives. Psychologists and behavioral experts were brought in to explain Tucker's personality, her troubled past, and the potential psychological factors that contributed to her violent actions. The courtroom became a place not just for legal arguments, but for an exploration of the complexities of human behavior, youth crime, and accountability. Media coverage of the trial amplified the intensity. Every development was reported and analyzed, with public opinion sharply divided. Some believed that Tucker's age and circumstances warranted leniency, emphasizing the potential for rehabilitation. Others insisted that the severity of her actions required the full weight of the law, arguing that justice for Shane Moore demanded a firm response. This debate mirrored a broader societal conversation about juvenile crime, morality, and the balance between punishment and second chances. As the trial unfolded, the evidence against Tucker Reed proved overwhelming. Forensic analysis, witness testimony, and digital communications all painted a clear picture of premeditation and intent. The prosecution emphasized that this was not a crime of passion or an accidental escalation, it was a deliberate act carried out by someone fully aware of the consequences. The courtroom grew tense as the details were laid bare, leaving jurors, family members, and observers stunned by the cold logic behind the murder. Ultimately, Tucker faced sentencing that reflected both her age and the seriousness of the crime. The court had to balance the need for justice with the recognition that Tucker was still a young person capable of rehabilitation. The legal outcome sent a powerful message: while youth can complicate legal responsibility, premeditated acts of violence, especially against family, demand accountability. The sentence became a focal point for discussions about juvenile justice, the limits of rehabilitation, and how society should respond when a young individual crosses moral and legal boundaries in such a devastating way. The consequences extended beyond the courtroom. For the family, every day was a reminder of the loss they had suffered and the betrayal that had occurred. For the public, Tucker's sentencing underscored the difficult balance between justice and mercy in cases involving young perpetrators. And for Tucker herself, it marked the beginning of a life shaped by her choices, a life that would forever be defined by a single, horrifying act and the legal accountability that followed. The case of Tucker Reed and Shane Moore remains a haunting example of how youthful impulses, premeditated violence, and family betrayal intersect with the justice system. It forces society to confront uncomfortable questions: how do we protect victims while addressing the unique circumstances of juvenile offenders? How do we ensure that justice is served without losing sight of the potential for reform? And perhaps most importantly, how do we reconcile the terrifying reality that someone so young can commit a crime so calculated, leaving a permanent scar on everyone involved?